Hello, everyone. A very nice day, a very hot day, actually. I'm melting from the inside right now. Thank God for the ACs here. Today, I'm going to be talking about what does it mean to be decentralization. So for today's topic, I'm actually not going to be talking about the project that I'm working on, which is Astar Network. If you want to learn more about Astar Network, we have a booth up there in the pillar stage. After this talk, we're going to be having a break, and probably you'll have a lot of, if you have any questions, if you want to learn more about what we work, you can meet us there. But instead today, I'm going to be talking more about a general topic, the concept of decentralization and the whole purpose of blockchains and Web 3.0. So let's look at today's agenda here. First, we'll start with what is decentralization in a definition way, and also the history behind decentralization. Second, we're going to look into the history of communication. It's going to be starting with how humans communicate both in decentralized, centralized way. We want to look into why people want to talk about decentralization. Third, we'll analyze decentralization to its components, its factors, and determinants. And finally, we'll conclude. So a little bit about me. My name is Hoon Kim. I am the CTO of Astar Network. I was born in South Korea, currently living in Munich, Germany. I have quite a few years experienced in the Dotsama ecosystem from a developer perspective. I've been doing Bitcoin for a very while back, although I've never really had a lot of Bitcoins. If I did, probably I wouldn't be here by now. I was more interested in the development side of it. I also love making games. I love anime. I love manga, so many great stuff, which means I am qualified to talk about this topic. So let's move on. So first, what is decentralization? If you look at the textbook definition of decentralization, it's defined by Webster's. It defines it like this. Decentralization is the process by which the activities of an organization, particularly those regarding planning and decision-making, are distributed and delegated. So it's basically saying, like, instead of having a central authority handling everything, you delegate certain tasks to certain entities, groups, or systems. But what's the history behind decentralization? What's quite interesting, because the way how the philosophy of decentralization came about came with the Age of Enlightenment. It started out, it shares the same history behind the term centralization. And of course, with Age of Enlightenment, we know it's what really made people think about decentralization and centralization was through the French Revolution, which I think it's quite interesting to talk about this considering where we are right now. And I don't have to explain what the French Revolution is to you guys here, but just in a nutshell, we had the first estate, second estate, third estate. Guys need money. They're pretty horrible at governing. They increase more taxes to get more money to pay back. It was a shit show, basically. And people were mad. Now they rebel. But what's interesting here is, so the guy, Alexis, and I will not pronounce his last name, sorry, he quotes that the French Revolution began with a push towards decentralization, but it ultimately became, in the end, an extension of centralization. So this is sort of how we perceive the history of decentralization. It started after when the French Revolution was over. Why is he saying this? Because after the French Revolution, we didn't really change the structure as a whole. We sort of changed titles. Now we don't have the nobles, we don't have clergy. It had the same structure in a sense that we still have people on the top, people on the bottom. Still people who are working, paying taxes, and people who are using those taxes to do something else. But with the revolution, who wears which hat has changed. So in a sense, it didn't really had a fundamental effect on it. And this is also reflected by the next person. His name is Maurice Bloch. This was a quote from a journal, an article that was titled Decentralization. And I'm not joking, a guy named Bloch wrote about decentralization. I cannot make this shit up. So to quote him, decentralization was affected in France, but the guardianship remains as before. For instead of the minister, it was the prefect who rendered decisions. So now with decentralization, in this context, it means that is it's a system where you are delegating certain tasks to someone. So if we look at it in more broad sense, what we talk about decentralization, how we mention in the blockchain space versus how we see it in action is quite interesting, because it's like how international politics works. We have different countries with their own sovereign nation, sovereign laws. We also have different prefectures with their governors and their laws. So instead of having a central figure just determining the fate for everyone, it is more distributed and decentralized. So and both figures are putting the word decentralization in sort of a way where it's not really necessarily positive. But why do we still care about decentralization now? Why are we here? Because the whole point of Web 3.0 is that it's decentralization, it's decentralized, no point of failures. We no longer have to rely on the centralized centralized systems. Why do people want that? So what does decentralized mean first? It means liberty, autonomy, mobility, a little bit of anarchy there. Also it means diversity, and of course very messy. Because it's really hard to govern stuff when there's so many different people with power. How can we really balance that? But that also means that it's diverse in its opinions. And most importantly, it represents liberty. And that's why people want decentralization. In the modern world, our current politics is, I wouldn't say the best, but it's still relatively decentralized compared to how it was like a couple of hundreds of years ago. But why are we talking about decentralization now? What do we want to decentralize? Is it the government? Is it the service? To explain that, well, first let's look into how we should define the new way of looking at decentralization. So the degree of decentralization is closely related to the power of control that one has despite external forces, meaning that if there is an external force who is affecting your decisions, do you still have autonomy over it? And of course, that also means ownership of something. Do you really own something? That is a huge component of decentralization. So how do you want to apply this concept, these components, into what we're seeing right now in this world? Now, a lot of ways you can apply these logic, which one would be economy. So decentralized economy is when people own, well, what they own, the economic, monetary value, whatever. Okay, do you really own something? Right now, if you put your money in the bank, do you really own that, or does a bank own that? And it's a bit of a tricky question, because if there is a government guarantee, then technically speaking, you do own that in a more soft way, not in a verifiable way. But you can see that's also why people are interested in blockchain. Specifically, Bitcoin was sort of made to liberate that concept. Another thing is administration. So decentralized administration, as in, do you really have power to voice your thoughts? If you have a good idea, will your idea actually be accepted, or will it be ignored just because of where you're from, or just because of any other factors that are outside of what you're trying to preach? And last, of course, communication. If you want to communicate with something, an organization, entity, long-distance communication, does it go through something? Does it go through censorship? Do you have the power to really say what you want to say? These are all factors of decentralization that we are trying to achieve in the modern age. So now I'm going to talk into the history of communication, specifically why we want decentralization in communication, but also this chapter will definitely deal with every other aspects of decentralization that I mentioned before. So first, history of the internet. Probably you guys know a lot. We've been living in it for a while now. It was invented by Tim Berners-Lee, and the point of an internet was that it's connecting everyone without having to go through this pesky bureaucracy. It's not back in the old days when you wanted to send in mail, a physical mail. You had to go through a post office, which is set up by the government. So whatever you send there essentially goes through the government. And when you wanted to go somewhere or talk somewhere or express your thoughts, you always had these middlemen. There's always this process of authentication that you have to go through by a trusted third party. And say if you have a great opinion about something, anything, If you wanted to publish that in a news article back in the days, you had to first, well, be a journalist or be part of a news organization, or you have to know a journalist friend, and they have to accept that, write that under paper, and then the editor has to say yes. And there's like so many steps it takes for you to voice your opinions out in the world. But with the internet, it really solves a lot of those problems by allowing us to directly connect to other people. And another great thing about internet is that anyone can set up their own servers as long as you know how to do it. You can always connect with other people, regardless of where you are in the world, as long as you have those the physical cables connected here. And this is really the beauty. Another thing is, there's no global legal entity that decides how internet is going to work. It's more like a bunch of corporations and great minds in the world coming together and coming out with a single standard. And that's how internet has been evolving. We never have one country that dictates how it should be like. Although I say that, but but my next slide will probably contradict that a little bit, because there is definitely a single government that does sort of, well, let's say censor stuff that happens in the internet. And that's why now the internet is starting to see its peak in terms of what we already have in our infrastructure and our communication method. Because we rely so much on centralized organizations' service and their way of doing things and their policies to I guess, distribute our voice to the world. So first problem is the surveillance and censorship. Now, of course, we have the USA Patriot Act of 2001 that happened after the terror attack. Now, the US government has total authority over any communications that's happening that goes through their jurisdiction. The NSA PRISM Act that was exposed by Edward Snowden also points out that, yes, if internet traffic, if a packet goes through, it just happens to cross the US jurisdiction, then the US government has the right to monitor that, censor that, do whatever they want. And this is, and they can do this in a mass scale because most of the communication that we're doing actually goes to the corporation. So the US government only has to ask the corporates nicely, can you give us some good data? You know, I want some data. You don't hog all the data now. And it's a problem because now we thought internet was going to decentralize us. Traditional days of trying to voice your opinion through a newspaper, we have so many intermediaries. Now, we thought with internet that intermediary is gone, but we still do have those. If you want to write a tweet, it technically goes through a Twitter server, and if you make a video on YouTube, that also goes through YouTube's content moderation. And there are so many intermediaries involved in it. The only difference is that back in the old days, it took like weeks, months, if not years. Now it takes like a couple of minutes to finish that. But the intermediary still stays because we rely on those corporations. And it's also the next point here. Content ownership is also a huge problem. So when it comes to Web2, or I guess centralized organizations in general, like they have the right to share any user data that they collect. It is beyond our control. If we say like, no, I don't consent on providing my user data, then they're like, well, I'm not going to give you our services then, because, you know, like, what are you going to do? Pay? No, I'm not going to pay for Google. So that's horrible. I'd rather just sell my personal data, right? That's a huge problem here because we don't really know what is going on in the back at all. There's no way, it's all in a black box. So it's very scary if you think about it. And another thing is, in a centralized platform, whatever content that you upload, the corporation has a right to change this. In a Web 1 world, it was all read-only websites. If you have a good server in your basement, you can set up your own website, anyone can connect to it. Also, anyone can hack that as well. It's also a problem. But it was really difficult to make your own services. So that's why we would delegate those hosting services to a third-party company. And now we are not only delegating the in a Web 2 world, we're not just delegating servers, but we're also delegating the right to your content. Because now it's so easy to make and post your content. Back in the old days, you couldn't do that. You had to make your own website just to publish a video. There wasn't really a way to upload your video and that would be shared by millions. Now we do, thanks to the corporations, right? But that also means they are the one who owns all those information and your creative rights. And they're also driven by profit. Like, don't get me wrong, I love money like everyone else, but if you let a company who is solely driven by profit, not some sort of a vision or a motive that goes beyond profit. They're not trying to use profit as a way to fulfill a certain goal, but they're using profit as profit itself becomes the goal to pay off their shareholders, people who have authority over their organization. That's because we live in a capitalistic society, right? And this becomes a problem because now whatever makes money is what they're going to be focusing on. They're not focusing on what makes sense. They're not focusing on what has value to the users. They only focus on what users are willing to pay for. So the biggest problem here is users have no authority over the creation. We create something, we upload something, we buy something from an organization. We do not have authority over it. So you don't really own anything in this case. So let's look at a couple of examples here. Like, for example, recently Ubisoft, a French company, coincidence, they actually started removing their games on online stores. Even if you bought the game now, you can't play it. Even if you own a CD, a physical disc version of the game, you can no longer download updates for this game. And this is a huge problem because now I bought the game from them, but they're telling me like, we're not gonna maintain this game anymore. I don't know why. Fuck off. You know, it's a huge problem here. And if we look at online games, that's also a huge problem because online game requires a server to actually work, right? But a server costs money for a company to operate. There's no way to incent, and P2P servers are also rigid with so many hackers there, and it's really slow. There's so many problems going on right now that even with online games, if the company decides to pull the plug in a more literal sense, no one can play that game anymore, even if you buy it. If you bought like a skin in a game, you don't really own that if the server goes down. Even with you guys know how Vitalik Buterin, he got interested in Bitcoin and blockchain, eventually made Ethereum. Well, he was playing WoW, and then Blizzard decided to just remove some of his funds due to a server hack or an incident going on. So he noticed that, yeah, wow, if my character is in a centralized system, the organization who owns that system can pretty much do anything without any reason. So you never really own anything, but you get the illusion of ownership. So that's another thing is with the YouTube as well. Like if you know so many people, YouTubers, content creators on YouTube who rely on YouTube's monetization system to make a living. They can only live, back in the old days, YouTube was supposed to be a YouTube, as in like anyone can create any video. If it goes viral, if people really like it, then you get paid for it. So people can make something that other people like. It's not really perfect, but it had its merits. But with now YouTube, the organization is centralized, so they have the right to change any policy they want, any way, how they want it. So in a sudden moment, you could actually see people losing money and losing their livelihood just because of a factor that they have no control over at all. How would you call this a rational era to live, really? We are seeing the same thing over and over again. And I mean, I'm not really saying that is the case, but the resemblance is uncanny here. They have the ownership. We, as the normal folks, don't have any ownership. We just be happy with whatever they happily give us. So that is why people created Web 3.0. Naturally, we see the limitations here. We really want ownership, we want control, we want stability in our lives. We want decentralization and freedom. So we want to decentralize the internet, the way how it is, the value that it provides now, but also with the ethos that we had during its inception. So let's now analyze decentralization. Like, what does it really mean to be decentralized, and what are the main factors, and how do you even measure decentralization? Of course, I cannot actually come up with a well-formulated theory yet. I'm still looking into it a lot. This is actually a topic that I've been researching for a while, and so far I was able to come up with a clean format. So basically, we have 3 layers of decentralization in any given service or organization. One is the ecosystem layer, very top. Next, we have the administration layer. Ecosystem would be the, you can say the application citizens or something that lives on top of a certain platform or an organization. And the administrations are the one who has the right to change the platform or the organization depending on its requirements. And we have the protocol layer. Protocol is a little bit more technical term, but if we put this into a if we use this analogy to a government, then it would be like the constitution, something that the administrators cannot easily change. And they do have influence on it, yes, but it's something that actually they rely on to ensure that it actually works. You could, for a company, it could be like a founder's agreement or a shareholder agreement. And here, so the top layer sort of relies on the bottom layer to not fuck up, but the bottom layer can influence what's going on in the top layer. So let's look at YouTube as an example here. So YouTube, you see the ecosystem layer. We have the content creators, people who are making videos, they're uploading. How decentralized is it? Well, I would say it's actually somewhat decentralized because anyone can upload a video. They can just easily create a Google account or a YouTube account, Google Plus account if that's still a thing, which is not. You can just upload your video right away. There is no restrictions in uploading it. Of course, I'm not saying that there's no restrictions in maintaining it. That's a different story. Where now, the next layer, the administration layer, it comprises of Alphabet, the company, Google, or the parent company of YouTube, and its shareholders. They are the one who influence what the ecosystem should be like, or what kind of ecosystem they really want to have. They cannot directly ask people to upload this or not upload that. So they have to be a little bit more subtle. Of course, like YouTube is they're not really subtle at all, but get my point in that it's in their best interest to make sure that the ecosystem is somewhat autonomous. But the administration layer is so centralized. They only have one purpose, and generally speaking, they're kind of homogenized. Not anyone can be a shareholder of YouTube or Google. It's a little bit difficult in that. YouTube servers. So who has access to YouTube servers? Of course, the company and its engineers. But even the engineers, they can only operate certain things that does not go against the contract that they have with the administrations. So the access layer, not everyone has access to it. It's extremely decentralized. But so what if we use this framework to a blockchain? So let's start with a very well-known decentralized platform, which is Bitcoin. So the ecosystem layer, we have users. Now, I didn't put dApp in it because you can't really make dApps on Bitcoin. So naturally, the ecosystem are any projects like wallets or protocols or services that use Bitcoin to a certain capacity. And anyone, literally anyone, you don't even need an internet to make a wallet. It's just math. It's that easy, that open. It's completely permissionless. Anyone can do it. And next, the administration layer. So who actually has the right to make changes to the Bitcoin protocol? It's consensus layer. It's the way how it conducts things. Well, we have the Bitcoin improvement proposals, or BIP, and anyone with a great idea can submit a BIP to the Bitcoin organization or its repository or any other method. And if it's something that the community agrees on and says that, yes, we really have to implement this improvement to our protocol, then it gets accepted. It is not determined by who you are. There's no restrictions in terms of like what you need in order to get your voice heard. Anyone with an idea can raise their voice. Of course, you also have GitHub issues, dev, and community members who can influence which BIP gets accepted and which direction it goes. If they disagree, they fork it. They create Bitcoin Cash. They create Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, whatever. And we also have the protocol layer, which is proof of work, the consensus algorithm that actually allows this network, this ecosystem to live. And proof of work is also extremely decentralized because anyone with a good hardware can run up a mining node, and that's how the transactions are passed. And here you can see I actually put decentralized and not extremely decentralized in the administration layer because you still need some sort of knowledge. You still have to be part of the community in order to say something. But the fact that anyone can do it means that it is quite decentralized. Now let's look into the next example, which is probably the reason why everyone is here, which is the Dotsama ecosystem. And you can see in the ecosystem layer, we have users and small projects. And small projects includes parachains, wallets, any other services that use any capacity of Polkadot and its governance. And we have the administration layer, which comprises of governance, Web3 Foundation, Parity themselves, of course. We do have Polkadot, we do have PSP, the Polkadot standard proposal that's what determines what standard Polkadot should have, but it's sort of more of a suggestion than a enforcement. So you can still go against it. Nothing really happens, and it is also. Yeah, it's not as effective as BIP, but that's because Polkadot is not as mature as Bitcoin, obviously. And here I put it as slightly centralized because the requirements of being a part of the governance of the Dotsama ecosystem is not. It's a little bit difficult than how it is in Bitcoin or Ethereum. Like, to be part of governance, you still have to get a seat. And if you look at the actual democracy palette data, right now, the majority of the seat is occupied by people from Web3 Foundation and Parity. So in the end, it's still like organizations, maybe not for profit, and they do have a better vision behind them. So I am more confident than a traditional company, but it still is somewhat centralized in that sense. And when it comes to the protocol layer, nominated proof of stake, it's unlike proof of work where if you have good hardware, anyone can start up a node. In case of the Dotsama ecosystem, specifically the relay chain nodes, validator nodes, you still need to stake some amount. You have to, there's a barrier to entry. Not anyone can just easily do it, although it is somewhat permissionless compared to the extremely centralized services. So really, it's not really in a negative sense. It's more like you do have certain requirements that you have to fulfill, which is not as easy as it would be. But one thing I want to emphasize here is that by looking at three examples, you'll notice that decentralization is not in like a binary state. It's not just you are fully decentralized or you're fully centralized. It's more in a spectrum. You could be partially decentralized, you could be partially centralized. And if you're looking at Dotsama ecosystem, it is partially centralized in certain aspects, decentralized in certain aspects, somewhat decentralized in certain aspects. And I'm not trying to say this as a bad thing because my next point here is, well, I guess I'll explain why it's a bad thing. Yeah, challenges. Right now, the governance participation is not that high. So even if we do have like great proposals, it's mostly like the same people over and over voting, and people are not interested too much in this too. It's a pretty boring topic. If you go to Polka assembly, you're only looking at the transactions that's going to be executed. So the context is also kind of blurry. You don't see some interesting governance, like should we attack Solana or something like that? No. I mean, of course, that'd be horrible. But we don't really see those kind of engaging moments. We don't really move as a community in a sense that we are together. It's more like, it's more the typical stuff because it's still in its early stage and we don't see a lot of people coming in as much as we would with any other protocols. And it's no stakes really. Like if you lose, as an average user, most likely you would only care about the token price, or maybe you would only care about a specific parachain. And it's hard to expect your average users to understand both parachains and relay chains. As I said, it's still early stage, so it's bound to happen. At some point, we could get fully decentralized, and everyone is really working hard on this. Now, I'll skip this part since I don't have a lot of time, but there are some other unsolved problems, like should we literally let anyone inside the network? Yes, no, so many different questions. Certain service says like we have to have a way to verify identity. Some might say like no identity is the whole point of decentralization. But as I said, it's a spectrum. If it makes sense for you, you go for that. If it doesn't make sense, you don't go for that. How can we trust the roadmap of a project? If a project presents these roadmaps, like we still have to make sure that they're going to deliver on that. But there is no metric, there's no verifiable way to guarantee that. And how can we trust the code if we cannot read the code? Worst case scenario, you could see like this, where the users are also being extracted by the DAO founders and whales, Hopefully, it doesn't go like that. But everyone with great minds are trying to look into this issue. Everyone acknowledges that this issue is a thing. So we can see a bright future. So my conclusion is, it's not really decentralization does not refer to putting everything on the blockchain, okay? It's not something like go for everything. We're not gonna maximize one thing, because that would also be a form of centralization, wouldn't you say? We want diversity here. So it's really about making people acknowledge what is ownership, what do they actually own, what are they losing out by not looking into what we have right now. The whole point of Web 3.0 is to liberate people from their minds. Thank you.
Hoon, do you take some question or not?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. If there's any questions, I could answer that right now. 5 minutes, right? Yeah.
But do you have question? That's the first one. Oh, sorry. Oops. Oh, no problem.
Thank you, Hoon. This was an amazing presentation. You said you're doing research on this topic. Can you elaborate a little more on this?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So my research is mostly right now focused on, I guess, how to define decentralization, measuring decentralization on a given protocol and a given aspect. I defined it into 3 layers, and my current research is to understand how can we actually quantify the decentralization of the ecosystem, the administrators, and its protocols. And my next, I guess, research focus would be to understand what are the influence factors. If the decentralization of a certain layer is low, then how would that affect the top layer, and it's, et cetera. But it's the purpose of this research is to understand how a blockchain project should structure itself to gain confidence in being decentralized, and how should we make a governance around this this concept. Yeah.
No more question? Okay, thank you.
Means longer breaks, so thank you.